This video will show you how to set up a UTM link. That's a tracking link that will tell you through Google Analytics how someone arrived to your website from a very specific marketing effort you made. I'm going to use an example of my show notes from my podcast leading to my newsletter. So let's paint the picture here. So I'm going to go to a podcast episode. I've already published this, but you would set this up or could refresh it based on how you set up your podcast. You always have the option to do show notes where you can do episode description, and it lets you do links in there. So in my show notes, I had added a link saying add us to your inbox. So sure, I could go to my website. I want them to go to my website. So where I want them to go is this link, my newsletter in my website. I could totally go copy that link and just go paste it directly into that as a hyperlink, and they would go right to my newsletter in a single click, and that'd be fine. But now I don't know where they came from, and I really want to know that. Are these things being effective? Should I be spending time and money on it? So if I want someone to click a link from somewhere outside my website to come to my website, I should create a tracking link so that Google Analytics will tell me if that link worked. So here's how you do this. You're going to want to go to Google URL Campaign Builder. And notice I've got this in my search already, but if you type it in your search bar, Google URL Campaign Builder, first thing that comes up, this is a free site, okay? Just like Google Analytics is free. You have to set it up, but it is free to obtain and use. This is also free. So what this is asking me, saying, okay, well, Rachel, you have a link on your website you want people to go to. You need to tell us a little bit more about where this link lives out in the universe so that now that way you can track it according to how you want to. So let's start with this form. So Google Campaign URL Builder, first thing it's asking me is like, what is the website you're trying to drive people to? Now, remind you, this should be your own website. You can absolutely set up tracking links for other people's websites, but if you don't have access to their Google Analytics, what's the point? Unless you're doing some influencer work. So I'm going to go to this particular site that I want them to go to. I'm going to copy the URL. I'm going to come back over here and pop that into this. Now, I'm going to scroll down really quick because as this goes, you're going to find as we build these things in here, it's going to be updating this field at the bottom. But let's go ahead and keep going. So URL, so the campaign ID, you don't have to use this. Really, the only ones that you do need to use are these ones with the asterisks. That's typically all I use because if this is your first experience with UTMs, this might be like, what are you talking about? I don't have a campaign ID. No problem. So first thing, I start kind of from the outside in. If I have an overarching thing saying, hey, I actually put out audio podcasts, but I also put out a video podcast on YouTube. So that's my podcast effort overall. I'm going to call that campaign podcast, right? Because it's kind of an umbrella. If you had social media and you wanted to like say, hey, I do push out content on 3 different social apps, your campaign could be social media because you know, well, there's 3 different ones. And this is where we drill down a little bit more. Create that umbrella campaign, and I'm going to call it podcast. Now I'm going to go here and I'm going to say, well, the source, remember I mentioned that I have a video podcast and an audio podcast? I want to get specific here. These are the show notes in my audio podcast. So I'm going to put that there saying, okay, this is for audio podcast. Quick note, if you are using more than one word, you can either run them together or as a separator, use a dash or an underscore. So a dash is what I have here, but I could also do an underscore, but you don't want to leave it to where there's just a space in between. Help out the technical stuff going on in the background. So you can do audio podcasts. I tend to use dashes, so that's what I'm doing. And then now I've drilled down from the umbrella. I know I'm going directly for audio podcast, but now where in that audio podcast? Is this in the show notes or is this if they're clicking a banner or what's happening here? It is indeed in the show notes. So I'm going to put in that is coming from the show notes. Now, if I would like to do this as well, because you notice that I had a few different links here I have a link to my blog. I've got a link to my newsletter. I've got a few different things going on there. If I want to get super specific, I could use these other terms. These will help and show up in Google Analytics so you can filter in things. I could say, you know what, this is actually for my newsletter, and say that that's the content, what this particular link is about. Now, notice that as I filled all these things in below, a URL, a longer URL with a bunch of different coding at the end of it, has been populated. So the pieces of this URL, again, I've got the base website I want them to go to, but then there's this question mark. It's like a separator. After that, you'll notice I have a UTM source, which I did say was audio podcast. I also have the UTM medium was the show notes. And then it says UTM campaign is podcast. And because I said, hey, this is specifically a link to my newsletter, UTM content is newsletter. So guess what? I'm going to copy this, and I'm just going to use this really quick. So copy this. Now I'm going to go to a new browser window. I'm going to paste that in. Now you might be wondering, is that going to actually still take you to the website? Oh yeah. So I'm going to hit enter. And look, I am on the newsletter page I wanted my audience to get to. But the beautiful part of this is now if I go into Google Analytics, and you would want to go into Google Analytics to your acquisition tab and then go to your campaigns tab, because I just clicked on this, I should see in my Google Analytics in the next day that there is a campaign for my podcast, and I got a click from me that is based on the audio podcast as a source, the show notes as the medium, and this is a newsletter link. So I get to now be able to say, oh, I see that that link worked. Somebody clicked on it, right? So that's how that works. That's how UTM works. And basically, again, you want to have access to Google Analytics on your website. That is free to set up. But if you start using these links, now you can get super granular about tracking how are people coming to your website. That's important information because there's only so many hours in the day and there's only so many dollars in your pocket. You want to be spending time and money on the things that work. All right, that was it for this video. Please hit subscribe if this was helpful, and we'll have some more coming for you next week. Thanks everybody, and have fun building your UTMs.